Hello, my name is Iain Haley Pollock. I'm a poet. My two collections of poems are Ghost Like a Place and Spit Back a Boy. This fall at Poets House, I'll be teaching a workshop on epiphanic poetry, poems that end in some sort of revelation. Very excited to be working with Poets House, organization and a space that I've long admired. I'm grateful to the folks over there for asking me to teach a workshop. This evening I'm going to read two poems to you. One is by Lucille Clifton, a poet who's very near and dear to my poetic heart, and I'm also going to read a new poem, try one out on you. Lucille Clifton is important to me in terms of both form and content. Form, I think I go to her for distillation when my poems are getting too long. Although this poem is different, I think, than many of her poems. I see it sort of spiraling forward in logic as a villanelle might. In terms of content, I love the many angles of approach that she takes. There's tenderness, grief, rage, but also her choice of subject matter. I think I really learned from Clifton that no subject is unworthy of a poem. And it really opened up the range of topics that I was willing to approach in my own poems. This poem isn't, she has many different selected and collected at this point. This one is in A Good Woman. If something should happen. For instance, if the sea should break and crash against the decks, and below decks break the cargo against the sides of the sea. Or if the chains should break and crash against the decks, and below decks break the sides of the sea. Or if the seas of cities should crash against each other, and break the chains, and break the walls holding down the cargo, and break the sides of the seas, and all the waters of the earth wash together in a rush of breaking. Where will the captains run, and to what harbor? Love that poem. And I think this new poem that I'm working on in some way is probably subconsciously indebted to Clifton and the way that poem moves. I think about that poem. I return to that poem frequently and think about it a lot. All the possible bodies. My alcoholic grandfather couldn't hold his money and passed a bad check. Hampton, Virginia, after Brown versus Board, but before Selma's Bloody Sunday. After my grandmother died, but before he moved the family north, back to the town of his birth. My mother saw her father cuffed and dragged from the house. The next day, by some miracle she never understood, he came home. Had he looked at the officer wrong, acted wrong, spoken wrong, been too familiar, been a few inches taller, been deeper voiced or darker skinned, and for this, had he caught a knee that night to the neck and not returned, perhaps my mother, needing to stay home and raise Aunt Joan and Uncle Keith, would have skipped college. Had she skipped college, perhaps she would not have gone for a PhD. Had she not gone for a PhD, perhaps she would not have met my father. Had she not met my father, perhaps I would not be here. Perhaps the boys sleeping upstairs from me now would not be here. When you spend 8 minutes and 46 seconds with your knee on another man's neck, you block not just the passage of air into his body, but block air into all the possible bodies dependent on that man and his neck to breathe. Breathe. Breathe, breathe, breathe. Thank you for listening and look forward to seeing you at my Poets House workshop or one of the many workshops that Poets House is having this fall.